folks, this is just a little bit of a heads up. Even though we are talking about technically a prologue today, we are talking about it after we have read the entirety of The Eye of the World. So this episode will contain spoilers for the entire book of The Eye of the World. So if you haven't read it yet, you will probably be spoiled, so listen at your own risk. This is The Wheel Weaves, a Wheel of Time podcast with no spoilers. Welcome, listeners. This podcast is safe for first-time readers because it's made by a first-time reader. I'm your host, Dani, and I'm the one who's taken on the task of reading through this 15-book mega-series. I'm joined by my co-host, Brett, who's a longtime fan, and he's acting as my tour guide on this journey. Before we get into our episode today, we want to welcome Zach Ingram, Amir, Jeffrey Smith, and John Love to the Wheel Weaves Patreon team. We'd also like to recognize Moltude as the newest producer-level patron, and he joins the ranks of Ward Weisensell, Joe Lott, and Passion Socks. We really want to thank you for your generous contributions and for your support. And this is officially our last episode of Season 1, where we're talking about The Eye of the World.
Yes, and we are starting at the very, very, very beginning.
Right.
Technically, sort of.
At the earlier prologue.
The earlier, but not. It's like the later prologue, but it's earlier. So
it's kind of confusing.
Yeah.
But we have a copy of From the Two Rivers.
Yeah.
Which is essentially the first half of The Eye of the World.
Yeah, and I'll jump in here because my fun fact for today is going to be just about how all this whole Ravens business came to be.
Okay, so this prologue is called Ravens, and it is a prologue before Dragonmount in From the Two Rivers.
Yes, not chronologically, just in the book.
In the book.
Yes.
Yes.
So this Ravens prologue is pretty interesting because originally this was not included in the first release of The Wheel of Time.
Yeah.
In 1990, this was not part of it. The book was not separated into the two halves of the first book. But in 2002, in an attempt to target more young adult readers, they thought that the first book was too long to attract a lot of readers.
Yeah, so which is totally accurate.
Yeah, it's a long book.
Yeah.
So they cut it in half, but then they thought the first half of the book wasn't going to be long enough, so they added the Ravens prologue prior to the first original prologue.
So I have a little bit of a question, and maybe this is part of your fun fact.
Sure.
But this earlier prologue, was it written before, or did he write it specifically for From the Two Rivers?
From what I know, he wrote it specifically for the From the Two Rivers book.
Okay.
But Robert Jordan took notes on all sorts of backstories for all the characters, so I assume that the details of that event that we see was already in his mind or in his notes.
Gotcha.
Just not as a complete prologue.
Or maybe in some sort of like edited, deleted pile.
Yeah, exactly. Because he had notes and notes and notes of events that never made it into the book series.
Gotcha. Okay. And then the second half of The Eye of the World is what I was complaining about.
Yeah.
Like 10 episodes ago.
Yeah.
Where it's called To the Blight.
Which is way before you ever find out that they're going anywhere near the Blight.
Way before, because From the Two Rivers actually ends at chapter 24.
Yes.
And you don't find out they're going to the Blight until like chapter 43 or something.
Yeah, I think the last chapter was Wolf Brothers, so that was way back when they met Elias.
Yeah.
So a lot of stuff happened after that.
Tons of stuff. What a spoiler name. I'm still upset about that, and I haven't received a response from corporate.
Oh my goodness, yeah. And the second cool part about this Ravens prologue is that in the graphic novel, it's actually included.
Yes, and I still have that from my school's library, which I promise I'll return.
Absolutely at some point.
Yeah. But it's very interesting because it's a very, very summarized version for obviously a graphic novel of the events of this prologue.
Yeah, and for anyone who hasn't had the opportunity to read it yet, it's from the perspective of Egwene.
Very
and that's
exciting.
Really cool because we never get an Egwene perspective in the first book.
No, you don't.
So it's really interesting that the take is from Egwene.
Right. Okay, so I say we go ahead and get into it.
Yeah, let's do this.
Okay, so it's actually not titled Prologue. like Dragonmount says Prologue and then it's called Dragonmount.
Yeah.
Right? This is actually titled Earlier.
Yes, which is a little bit deceptive because it's not before the prologue.
It's not before the prologue, but it's before the beginning of the book.
Yes.
Yes. And there are 2 ravens as the chapter icon.
Pretty ominous.
And it's called Ravens.
Yeah. And I think the fact that we're reading this after we've completed book 1, we're going to get so much more out of this.
You know, I actually did note that, and I wanted to talk to you about that after because I find it really cool reading it now, almost as if you pick more up, kind of like on a reread.
Yeah, absolutely, because you already have a lot of context for all of these events that they're talking about.
Yeah, it's actually kind of sad because I'd like to know what it's like to read this as a first-time reader.
Yeah.
So,
and technically you are a first-time reader, just not at the very beginning.
Exactly. And so we don't have my perspective on this chapter like we did in the prologue from my brand new to the series brain, because I could imagine that this prologue was a little bit confusing.
Yeah, there's a lot of heavy information.
Tons of information, tons of characters you're introduced to, tons of world building that doesn't quite make sense. So if somebody out there is reading this for the first time and this is the first thing that they read, I really want to hear from you.
Yeah.
Because I think that perspective would have been really cool. Like, I do like that we're coming back to this at the end, and I like the way we're doing this, but I also am a little bit sad that I didn't get the real, true, first-time perspective like I should have.
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay, and you also told me that you have only read this prologue, like, maybe once, like a really long time ago.
I only read it once. It's really hard to find this if you don't have the book, so I don't have a ton of knowledge about it, but...
You said you read it online somewhere or something.
Yeah,
right?
because I also was able to... There's a couple other addendums to a few things that I can't get into now that are online, so...
Yeah.
But anyways...
Okay, so that's kind of interesting that you got to read something relatively new.
Yeah, and since my memory sucks, this was basically like a first time for me.
Yeah.
So...
So yeah, I'm interested to hear your perspective on this as well. We get into Egwene right away. We get into her head, and she is... getting some water from the wine spring. We get right away that she's 9 years old.
Yep.
So we do know that this takes place before the beginning of the book, where they are clearly of like marrying age.
Yeah, and you don't actually get like an official age of anyone later on.
No, but in this prologue, we actually get some specific ages.
A ton of ages, which we can talk about once we get there.
Yes. Okay. So she really wants to be the best at everything. She's a determined young lady, that's for sure. Actually, kind of reminds me of when we were in Nynaeve's perspective.
Yeah.
Very similar.
Yeah.
Very self-deprecating, always telling herself she needs to do better and scolding herself for thinking certain things. And
yeah. With Egwene, it's kind of funny to see, like, at such an early age, she was determined to be the best at everything she does.
To be the best, and then to be considered older than she is.
Yes.
Yeah, she even at one point says that she wants to cut her hair short, almost like a boy. Like, it's not even fair that women have to, or girls have to have their hair long, even when it's not braided, but boys get to have it cut short because she's doing all this heavy lugging of water, and she has to wear all these heavy skirts, and she's tying them up, and I think that's just funny. That
she sees like the inequality in how you have to dress and appear.
Yeah.
But it's also kind of funny to note that here she's thinking, oh, I want to cut my hair short. And then later on in The Eye of the World,
we meet someone who has their hair cut short who's not wearing skirts.
So you have to kind of think, like, what was Egwene's perspective first meeting Min?
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. And then also when she's talking to Rand about, like, oh, who's Min?
Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of, like, behind the scenes stuff you have to imagine is going on in her head.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we move on in this chapter, Egwene spies a raven in a tree, and she notes that it actually seems to be watching the men, but then she calls herself silly and says, no, raven just like to bother the sheep, like, don't think about it.
Yeah, but we do get that it shuffles oddly. It's attacked by another bird, and then it does a sidestep.
Right.
And the only reason we pick up so heavily on that is because that's exactly what happens in, like, the
chapter
first...
2.
Yeah, chapter
Strangers,
2. So.
Yeah, exactly. With the raven on the top of the inn, or something like on the roof.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so Egwene notes that she knows about ravens and heard stories that they're the Dark One's eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's sort of the first time we're going to get mention of anything like that. And so it's interesting that she's already sort of aware of that.
Yeah, it kind of seems almost like a superstition that people don't even necessarily believe in, but like all those little superstitious things.
Yeah, well, and especially because she notes that nothing ever happens in the Two Rivers.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like a call to Matt saying, well, whatever happened here?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Which is funny. So we learn that there's a big sheep shearing event going on, and this is a big deal for all the farms and all the sheep farmers all around.
And then proceed to have like 17 pages of explanation of how you shear sheep.
Yeah, I was actually
There's a lot.
very surprised at how long this is. Like, this is longer than a lot of the actual chapters in the book.
Yes.
And it goes on and on and on.
About sheep shearing.
About sheep shearing and how you wash the wool and all the jobs of all the people and what they do. And oh my gosh.
There's a lot.
It was a lot.
Yeah. So we're not going to include lots of those details.
No.
Not necessarily relevant, but...
No, I'm going to skip ahead to the point where we learn about Egwene's family.
Okay, yeah, okay, let's do that.
Yeah, so Egwene notes that she has 4 sisters.
Yes.
So we don't get that anywhere else in the book.
And we can kind of figure out why once we finish this chapter, too.
Yeah. So her sister named Barrowyn
Yep.
is the oldest, and she has been widowed. Like, she's already married, she already had a baby, but her husband and her baby died of breakbone fever.
Yes, crazy.
Pretty tragic.
Very.
This is probably why Egwene starts feeling like she's the baby of the family, because her widowed sister has moved back in with them.
Yeah, and then she talks about how Egwene, like, luckily the breakbone fever didn't take her baby sister.
Right.
So over and over again in this chapter we get this, Egwene doesn't want to be referred to as a child or a baby
anymore.
And she's trying to act older than she actually is.
Yeah.
So some of that competitive nature coming out.
So I think that maybe in The Eye of the World, like, she definitely never talks about her sisters or her family.
It's never really brought
at
up.
all. So
yeah.
It really seems like she doesn't have a good relationship with her sisters. Like, it really seems like she doesn't like any of them.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
Okay, so at this event, we learn that she's the water girl. Basically, she walks around offering drinks of water to everybody.
Yeah, and that's like the job for all the young people.
Yes.
Children.
Right. To basically keep them busy, probably.
Yeah, and then you get advanced to like the food giver.
Yeah.
And then...
Well, and if you're a boy, then you get advanced to like sheep washer.
Yeah,
and,
sheep
like...
mover to sheep washer to like sheep shearer. There's like stages.
Yeah, and then there are some women who... or girls, I guess, who get to move the wool from here to the shelf and stuff.
There's a lot of like, this is the... And we never talk about this again later on.
Never,
so
yeah.
It's a little bit of like Emmons Field world building. So.
Yeah, it's kind of funny.
Yeah.
But as Egwene is handing out water to everybody, she sees Perrin and then Rand.
Yeah, yeah.
So we get little Rand and little Perrin... and little Egwene's thoughts about little Perrin and little Rand. It's pretty great.
I totally want to see like a memory of this, just with like the little kid actors.
Well, I actually do maybe have a little bit of a note about maybe the show starting this way.
With the Ravens prologue.
With the Ravens prologue.
That'd be pretty cool.
Because it's a pretty interesting story that Tam tells later on.
Very interesting.
And that would be an interesting way to open the show as well.
Yeah.
So Egwene sneaks a little closer because she wants to sort of see and hear what's going on. And Perrin is with his whole family.
Yes.
And then we get some more information about Perrin's family.
I love this scene because this adds so much detail to the first couple chapters when we had conversations about why does Perrin live with the Luhans? Why is he a blacksmith there? Why do we never really hear about his parents and his family? And this gives us all the details that I've always been looking for.
Yeah. And now, did you remember this from the first time you read it? Or was this sort of like interesting to you reading it?
I knew about his family dynamics, but I didn't remember the whole he's being passed off to the Luhans.
Yeah.
Like in this
It
scene.
was almost like a
this is the
business deal.
A transactional, here's the child, he'll be good in the forge. This is what he's going to do
Yeah.
And he's going to live with you, basically.
And the Luhans are just sort of like, don't worry, he's a good boy. He's going to do great.
And you have to think. So we know that the three boys are about the same age. We know that Egwene is like about 2 years younger than them.
Yeah.
So if she's 9, they're probably around 11 years old.
Maybe 12.
Maybe 12, like around that age. And now we know that they're older, like adults now, somewhere between 18 to 20. So parents lived with the Luhans presumably for about 6-7 years.
Right.
Like, it's been a while.
Yeah, because in this interesting interaction between Perrin's parents and the Luhans, from Egwene's point of view, it's very confusing. Like, she's like, why are they talking to each other? What's going on?
Why are they, like, happy? Or...
And she goes, well, none of this makes sense. And then she sees that Perrin has a baby sister.
Yep.
Like a baby on mom's hip. And then a little sister, and then another little bit older sister.
Yeah, so Perrin's got 3 sisters.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Lots of sisters.
Yes.
Happening. With Matt, too.
Maybe something in the water.
Maybe.
Yeah.
So they got interesting names. The baby is Patram. The little sister is Dezel. And then Adora.
Yeah.
I like the name Adora. It's cute, because it reminds me of, like, adore and, like, love. I don't know. I like it. It's a nice name.
And plus, Egwene was in Adora the Explorer.
The Explorer.
Yeah, there you go. That was terrible.
Yeah, that was bad.
Sorry. It just came to me.
I know. Sure it did. You totally didn't have that written down with a big star beside it. Make this joke.
Don't forget to tell this joke.
And then we also find out that his mother's name is Jocelyn Ibarra. Mm-hmm. And so we don't get anything else except for this is where he's sort of, instead of being promised to a woman for marriage, it's almost like he's being promised to the blacksmith as an apprentice.
For like a job.
Yeah. So that's kind of cool. Because that's probably a pretty important job and probably high on the respect rating.
Yeah, well, Luhan is on the village council, we find out later on.
Right. So at this point, Egwene notices that more ravens are gathering, like maybe 9 or 10, and they're all watching from the trees. So I think that I have to assume at this point in Egwene's life, this hasn't happened before. Or at least she hasn't noticed that this has happened before.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like this would be a regular event. Like, not that ravens are never around, but they're acting really weird, and there's a lot of them.
Yes.
So...
Well, I also find it interesting that if anyone else does notice, no one is mentioning or Egwene isn't noticing that other people are noticing. It seems like, from her point of view right now, she's the only one who's noticed this, and she thinks, that's weird, but then just, like, goes on with her life.
Yeah, because she's 9.
I really thought at some point she was going to mention it to someone or something was going to happen about these ravens. And then...
Nothing does.
So, there's that.
Yeah, but it especially makes it a lot more ominous knowing the time frame for what's happening. Especially since the whole, like, 20 years ago, 3 years ago. Like, right now we're about 6-7 years before the events of Chapter 1. So, like, this is clearly one of, if not the first interaction we get where ravens are searching for the boys.
Yeah. People
who might be the Dragon Reborn.
Right.
Like, crazy scary when you think about what's actually happening here.
Right. And it's just sort of... It's interesting that this is the very first thing that if you were reading this book for the first time that you're getting. And it's all crazy related to the rest of the book.
Yeah.
So,
and the only thing you could really think at this point in the series, if this was your first read, would be like, ooh, spooky ravens.
Yeah.
Like, that's it.
Yeah, I'd probably read into the fact that the Dark One is spying on these people. And like, why? Because Egwene did make the connection.
She does point it out pretty strongly, so.
And then we get a whole story about how the Dark One was sealed. Resealed in his prison, so this sort of alludes to the fact that he's breaking out. Like, it is actually quite on the nose.
Yeah.
But maybe it's only in this book because it does appeal to young readers, and it's a little bit more straightforward about what's happening or going to happen.
Yeah.
It makes the rest of this book a little bit less confusing, I think. Because... in new editions of The Eye of the World, this doesn't exist.
True, yeah.
This is only in the book targeted to young readers. And I don't even know if this From the Two Rivers is even still in print.
Yeah, like based on the copy that you have, it's from 2002.
Yeah.
So
it's old looking. Yeah, it's from a school library from the 2000s for sure. So I don't know. I just find it all a little bit interesting.
Yeah. My mind just kind of went crazy there because when I said it's from 2002, I thought that's not so long ago. But then I realized it's 18 years ago.
Yeah, that's actually quite a long time ago.
Okay.
So that would be interesting for us just to look up if this is still in print and maybe dig a little bit deeper as to why it's included here and then never included again. Never added in. Because even on this cover of From the Two Rivers, there's a little funny orange spiky star that says a new prologue by the author.
Yeah. Like, I hope it's from the author.
Yeah, well, yeah. But at the same time, there's no new editions of The Eye of the World with a little sticky that says a new prologue.
Yeah.
Right?
So.
Okay, so back to our scene of Egwene watching Perrin and his family and noticing Rand in the distance. And then Adora, who's older than Egwene, but I don't think by much.
Yeah, probably not very much.
She has a different job than her, though.
Yeah.
That's how we can tell that she's older.
Yes, because depending on your age, depends on your job.
Right.
So, but it also turns out that Perrin is pretty.
Yeah, and apparently other girls from the village have also been staring at Perrin.
Yeah, because at this point, Perrin is taller than Rand.
Right, which is interesting, but Rand is almost as tall as Perrin, but has like big hands and feet.
Yeah.
So he's like gangly and weird looking.
And Perrin's just a big dude in general.
Yeah.
So
he's got curly hair and...
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah.
All right.
But Adora wants to know why Egwene is staring at Perrin because she says everyone knows that you're going to marry Rand al'Thor.
Yeah, so since they were 9, well, she was 9.
Yeah, which is pretty funny. And then they also mention here that she will marry him when she gets her braid. So that's clearly something that all young girls think about, and that means you're ready to be married when you get your braid.
Yeah, and I mean, some women wait a couple extra years too, it's noted, but...
And it doesn't sound like they wait. It sounds like the women's circle evaluates whether or not you're mature enough and ready for marriage.
Yeah, which, you know, honestly might not be a terrible thing for some people.
No, it's actually a pretty decent system. Some people probably should wait a little bit.
Yeah.
And they really just have a kind of a funny back and forth.
Yeah, Egwene kind of like sticks it to her a couple of times, so...
Yeah, she's definitely sassy, lots of back talk, and then she goes, stupid Adora, because now she's lost sight of where Perrin and therefore Rand have gone.
Yeah.
And because she's lost sight of them and she's been distracted, now she runs into somebody that she really doesn't want to see, and it is her youngest sister, Lois.
Yeah, just go with it.
Yeah. And she's 15, we learn. So there is a 6-year age gap between Egwene and her youngest sister.
Yeah, and you know what Bob Ross would call this? A happy little accident.
Apparently, yeah.
There you go.
Well, we see Lois arguing with Dig Coplin, and we hear about the Coplins here for the first time.
And we hear about the Congers in this prologue too, which is awesome.
Oh yeah, we do get
They're all terrible people. No one likes them.
Yeah, so this guy is awful, and her sister is arguing with him, and so she actually doesn't notice Egwene, so Egwene is able to sneak off.
Yeah, and again, that's building on the whole not a good relationship with her sisters bit.
She's really trying to avoid them.
Yeah.
Because Egwene here also thinks about her other sister, her third sister, I guess, that we're going to hear about right now. And this is Aline, who always has her nose in a book.
Yeah.
And barely notices Egwene ever.
And we get a really cool tidbit of information.
That Egwene's favorite book is the Jane Farstrider book.
Yeah, Tales of Jane Farstrider.
Very cool. And she dreams of seeing all of the strange lands.
Huh, I wonder when that's going to come up again.
That's funny.
Yeah. But I mean, again, it's really building on Egwene as a character that she is someone who has, since being a child, wanted to get out of Emond's Field.
Yeah.
She does not want to be here.
Yeah, even when multiple times she's thinking about the fact that she has to marry Rand. Basically, everyone says, she didn't know it, everyone says that she's going to marry Rand al'Thor.
And she thinks, well, maybe when I get my braid, or after a couple years after that, because
maybe I'll go adventuring for a little while first.
Because some women wait a couple years, and then she starts thinking, well, what kind of husband is gonna want to marry me if I'm gonna leave? Like, no one ever leaves. And she has this whole spiraling thought process too about that, which is kind of interesting. At 9 years old, these are like the things that are crippling her brain.
Well, and then as the first opportunity she gets to actually leave,
she takes it. And
she's gone. Yeah. Like 100%. She's on board with let's get out of here. Even if it is dangerous, even if we are being chased, like... Yeah.
Yeah. And then something really interesting happens is we are introduced to the village wisdom.
Yeah, but you also missed the fact that Master Elvire has almost 40 books.
That's a lot of books.
It's a lot. And imagine how many more books he has in like 7 years.
Probably more.
Yeah. That's great. Okay, yeah, let's get to this whole wisdom thing.
Okay, so she is the oldest woman in the Two Rivers. Super, super, super freaking old.
So old.
And this is what the entire village is used to, is their wisdom being the oldest woman alive.
Old.
And then she clearly kicks the bucket, and Nynaeve has to take over, who is young, but relatively to the oldest woman on Earth, she looks like a baby.
Yeah.
I can understand why they're a little thrown off by this.
Well, it's also interesting that even when she first became the apprentice, so the old wisdom's name is Doral Baron.
Yeah.
And even when Nynaeve was taken on as an apprentice, it says 3 years ago, she was too young, but that's because she was recently orphaned.
Right. And she should have gone to live with some other family.
Yeah, like your extended family in a different village, but instead, the old wisdom took her on.
Because her apprentice died of some mysterious illness, and that's what we actually hear about from Moraine.
Yes, when Nynaeve, she's saying what happened.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, but that's also really cool to note is why do you think that this old wisdom took on Nynaeve even though she's too young?
Because she's really freaking good at what she does.
Or she probably could feel some sort of like natural inclination.
Maybe, yeah, that too. The
channel,
power stuff.
The power, right? Yeah. Like why is she so good? So you have to assume that there's something along those lines going on too.
Right, and so the fact that she was a recent orphan and was taken on is an unpopular opinion in the village.
Yes.
Among everybody, but nobody talks about the women's business. That's not their business.
You stay out of it.
Yes, clearly. So a little bit of an interesting note is that Nynaeve is doing some bandage on someone who was drinking and sheep shearing. And
Billy Conger, none other, those dang Congers.
You're right. And so she's bandaging him up, but apparently bandages him wrong?
Or, I had an alternate theory.
Okay, what's your theory?
Okay, so the whole deal is Billy Conger's drinking on the job. He's like, I didn't drink on the job. But Nynaeve says, I bet you didn't. But she thinks that he did. And we know that Nynaeve is very, very, very skilled sometimes when it matters.
Yes.
Like when it actually depends, someone's life depends on it, she can somehow harness that channeling power to heal people.
Yeah.
So the master wisdom who's teaching her knows that Nynaeve's able to do these wonderful things. Yeah, she
seems confused and she's like, you did this wrong. Like, what's happening?
Not wrong. Yeah. It's just like he's not magically better.
Yeah.
Because Nynaeve doesn't want to make Billy Conger, who's drinking on the job, perfectly better right now because he deserves to be in a little bit of pain because you shouldn't be drinking and shearing sheep.
And Nynaeve is all about the justice.
Yes.
She's a very strong sense of justice.
Absolutely.
And so she stands back to let the other wisdom sort of step in, and she starts braid tugging.
Yeah, tugging on the old braid.
Right. And so we also get that she's had this braid for a year already.
Yeah.
So that sort of puts her at an age.
Because we also get mentioned in this prologue that typically at age 16 is when girls get their braid.
Yes.
That puts like a definite age
on Nynaeve.
And then we can infer how old Egwene is too later on.
Right. So at this point, Egwene notices more ravens watching. There are like dozens of them. And she also notes that these ravens are just watching the men and the boys.
Ha ha ha.
Which is very specific. Like, if I see birds watching things, like, it's hard to tell where birds are looking.
Yeah.
Their eyes are on, like, the sides of their head.
Yeah, but they'd all be pointing in one direction because there's clearly, like, a separation between the women doing the cooking and the food.
Yeah.
And the men are with the sheep.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Well, then we get some note about Egwene's last sister named Elisa?
Yep.
Elisa?
Yeah.
Whatever.
Sure.
She's 18, but doesn't have a braid yet.
Because she flirts with all the boys all the time, and apparently the women's circle doesn't think that she is ready for marriage.
So she's too immature.
Yeah, but she's pissed off about it.
Yeah.
Like, really pissed off. And because most other girls and all of her sisters got their braids at 16, and now she's 18 without a braid.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's a lot longer than just 2 years.
Yeah, and Egwene tries to, like, cheer her up a little bit by saying that Callie Coplin is 20, almost 21, and still doesn't have a braid.
Oh my goodness, those Coplins.
So, don't feel bad, because there's someone else there.
Who's worse than you.
Who's worse than you. Good one, Egwene.
Yeah.
So, Egwene goes looking for the boys, specifically Perrin and Matt, she's asking after.
Not Rand.
Knowing very well who is going to be attached at the hip.
Yeah.
They're all hanging out together. So she spies them eventually. Like, she goes off, oh, the boys are going to be thirsty. So she goes off with water for them.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And this is sort of where she starts thinking about Rand as her husband, and then starts thinking about those far-off lands, and how can she have a husband but also travel? Oh, what a predicament.
It's it's a big deal, so.
Yeah, and then she thinks, well, if he's going to be my husband, I should probably know more about him.
Yeah,
right?
And she says she sees him when they come in, like Tam and him come in from the farm, because we know Rand lives way out of town.
Yeah, and we also get her thinking that she wants a husband who is good to her, like her dad is to her mom.
Yeah, so someone who's kind, who's brave.
Yeah, all of those things. And so she thinks about how she knows Rand is kind. She's seen those before. She knows he's brave because he watches the sheep, but she doesn't really know anything else about him. And so she thinks, well, I better start getting to know him. So she eavesdrops on the conversation.
Yes. Very, very cool first sentence we get from Rand here.
Yeah, he wants to be a king.
But he's joking, probably.
He's totally joking.
Yeah.
He doesn't actually want to be a king. King of the sheep.
Yeah.
Idiot.
So, yeah, so it is really funny because he does say, like, laughingly,
I want to be a king.
I'd like to be king, yeah.
And then you know what Matt says? He wants to rescue an Aes Sedai and be rewarded.
Yeah. So, a little
I wonder
bit of...
if there's some foreshadowing here. Like, I'm interested.
Well, there's absolutely no foreshadowing in the book, so probably not.
And so all of the boys are all laughing about all of these ridiculous things that could never happen.
And they talk about where would Rand find an adventure in the Two Rivers?
Yeah, because there's nothing to do here.
Right. So then someone comes running up and tells the boys that the mayor wants to see them. And then we get that Egwene's dad is the mayor, even this long ago.
Yeah, so, like, presumably forever.
So it's not just, like, terms.
Yeah.
And it's not like a,
like an elected position.
Every 2 years, every 4 years, there's a... Well, maybe there is. Maybe every 4 years there is a vote and he just wins every year. We don't actually know.
Yeah, I mean...
okay, we know.
He owns the inn.
He owns the inn. So, he's the mayor.
A couple of really big things I wanted to point out here. One specifically is when Egwene's thinking about Rand, she says that he sometimes looks sad because he doesn't have a mother, and maybe he envies boys who have a mother.
Right.
Because we know that Cariol Thor died when he was young.
Yes.
And Egwene seems to be, like, picking up on that.
Yeah. Well, she also notices that he's got light blue eyes, but sometimes they look gray.
Noticing eye color.
Yeah.
Totally.
I suppose he's pretty. I guess it's nice to have a husband that you want to look at or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we get that the mayor has sent for these boys, and right away Matt's like, what? I didn't do anything wrong.
Guilty Matt.
Yeah, I like it. And then we get some notice here about Matt's family, because as the boys go to the mayor who wants to talk to them, we see a whole cast of people. So Tam is there, and then also Natty
Yep.
Clothin is his mother. And then we get his two sisters, Bodwin and Eldrin.
Yeah, you're doing great on the names.
No, I bet that's bad.
No, it's good. It's good.
It's really bad. So again, with the sister trend.
Yeah. Lots of sisters.
Okay, there is just a little bit of a funny line that I picked up on where Tam looks over at Rand, who's like obviously a little bit nervous to be talking to the mayor.
Yeah, like they all just got called in for maybe a punishment.
Yeah, and Tam makes Rand look less like a heron ready to take flight.
Yes, a little hint there.
A little on the nose.
Yeah, that there's a heron.
On the nose. To think about Tam and to think about Rand associated with a heron.
Yeah. I wonder when that'll come up.
I wonder. Okay. So, turns out the mayor just wants to tell them a story.
Yeah, it's story time. This is like your entertainment break.
Right. And it's like, okay, guys, I promised you a story. Gather round.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like their break from all the sheep guiding because the kids aren't doing the shearing.
Yeah.
Not supposed to let kids play with shears.
And so Matt and Dav really want a story about adventure, about Trollocs and Aes Sedai and false dragons. And Bran Alvear says that he doesn't really know any stories like that, but maybe Tam can help us out.
Yeah.
And then Egwene thinks, why would Tam know anything about that?
Which we know that Tam has a really interesting backstory that we really don't know much about.
That we don't know much about at all, actually.
But we know that he's super cool.
Yeah, Egwene goes, what? Why? What? Okay, and so they all start listening, and Tam says, what about a story about a real dragon?
Ooh. And Senbui
complains again.
Like on cue.
On cue.
Yeah.
Senbui's like, I don't like this. Meh. And he says, why don't you tell them a story about the 100-Year War, or the Trolloc Wars, or the Aiel War? And Tam's face changes for a moment at the mention of the Aiel War.
Yes, that's huge.
And it's just so subtle and so slight, and I just love that there's just these little things, and I can pick up on them.
Yeah, you can.
Because the first read, like, none of this matters at all.
Yeah.
So it's funny, which is why I also wish I could have read it from a first-time perspective and then gone back to it in hindsight.
I think my brain would have been exploding at this point, though, so maybe it's best that we didn't do that.
Well, wasn't your brain exploding when we read the prologue?
Yes, it was. So... But anyways, this is big because we know that Tam was somehow involved in the Aiel War.
Yes.
We know that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Probably, definitely.
Probably.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, it's story time with Tam.
Yes, and that means story time with Brett.
Sure does.
So, Tam is able to convince Senbui that he's going to tell a story about the real dragon, and he starts off in the Age of Legends, because we know that's when all the Aes Sedai and the dragon were around. And he talks about, cities were full of buildings that were taller than the White Tower, and only mountains are bigger than the White Tower. So we get that first reference to Tar Valon.
And the White Tower.
Yeah. And then this is a really cool point. He says there were machines that used the one power. So they carried people across the ground, and some say the sky.
So,
and that's
like traveling with a capital T. That's what I'm reminded of, or think about.
So traveling, what we know of was when LTT in the prologue does his teleporting thing.
Yeah.
This says there were machines that used the one power. LTT didn't use a machine to travel.
No, he didn't.
But there were machines supposedly that could bring people across the skies.
Like regular people?
Possibly.
Like not channelers?
Possibly. This is the Age of Legends, so you got to think all the best stuff in life, like, what do you have to call it the Age of Legends?
Yeah.
Kind of cool. Mm-hmm. There's no sickness, no hunger, no war, and then the Dark One touched the world.
Shoot. I hate when that happens.
In this perfect society. And maybe not so perfect, because, the next point, they talk about they didn't even have a memory of war because life was so good, but then when the Dark One shows up, it all came back real quick.
Oh, yeah.
And then that's when the War of the Shadow took place, and we've heard that called the War of Power. And it says, as many stood for the light as stood for the shadow. So in my mind, you have this perfect society in the Age of Legends as people talk about, but then as soon as the Dark One shows up, you have sides on the light and the dark side.
Doesn't sound so perfect.
It doesn't sound so perfect that there'd be so many people on the dark side if life was so good for everyone.
Well, and that just sort of makes me think that maybe
there were people in this, quote, perfect society who were enabling the Dark One to touch the world.
Exactly, right? So Tam goes on and talks a little bit more. He gives us some information about Aes Sedai going over to the Dark One, and they were called the Forsaken. Plus there's Trollocs and Myrddraal.
Myrddraal are death.
Yeah. And then we do get a few new Forsaken names. So reading the entirety of the book...
We've heard Lanfear before, I think.
Yeah, but we haven't heard Samaraj.
No, we haven't heard that one.
So we have a little bit of a cast.
I was waiting for him to say Aegonor or Balthamel or whatever. Balthamel?
Balthamel, yeah.
Yeah, I was waiting for that. When I read this sentence, I thought, and then no.
Not quite, yeah. But we know there's a few of them, so yeah. Okay. So he goes on to talk about the wars, and he's doing the whole big battle explanation, and he says that if there were 100,000 people on each side, that would have been considered a small battle. So, like, during this War of Power, cities were razed, like, complete destruction all across the world. So, it was bad times. And this is the prelude to the breaking of the world as well.
I have a thing I want to interject right now.
Sure.
I was going to, wait, because I thought maybe at the end we'd do, a little wrap-up of the whole book and figure things out. But as we go, I think this makes sense to talk about right now.
Sure.
So, I did start rereading The Eye of the World.
Okay.
And I have a little bit more prediction-wise about later on.
Oh my god, you do?
Yeah.
Okay, do it.
You're so funny.
I'm so excited
the
about
way
that.
your face lights up when I talk about this. So, in the prologue, when Luz Theron is all confounded...
Yeah, brain injury, I think is what the first thing you said.
I said brain injury, concussion.
Concussion, yeah.
Dementia. I had a lot of funny theories. But when he's all confused...
Yeah.
And he sees Aelon, but doesn't know who he is and thinks he's just a guest. He says, have you come for or do you have the voice? Have you come for the singing?
Yes.
And so everything is all lovely and wonderful, I think, because of the singing. And then that makes me think of the traveling people who are searching for the song.
Oh, okay.
So that everything can be lovely and wonderful and perfect again.
Yes.
And so maybe after hearing this story about how things were perfect and then all of a sudden they weren't, maybe whatever this singing is, whatever this song is, I think the Tinkers are just kind of bonkers. When you read the book, you're like, okay, Tinkers.
Searching for your song?
Sure, go for it.
Yeah.
But they're clearly searching for
something.
For something.
Yeah.
And this song or singing maybe was actually something.
Because I had asked you when we first got introduced to the whole singing and we're looking for a song.
They're looking for a legitimate, actual sing-songy song.
Because I asked you, do you think that this is just like a metaphor? Are they searching for an ideal?
No, I think it's a legit song.
Like a legit magical song that'll help return the world to better times.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that that's a real thing now. I think that's a real thing that helped the Age of Legends be so wonderful and perfect.
Interesting.
Just because of that one line that Luz says.
Okay.
So that's just a funny little tidbit there.
A little extra prediction there.
Yeah.
Okay. So, back to the bad time story with Tam. So, during the War of Power or the War of the Shadow begins to win. So, the bad guys are winning. This is bad. The light is being pushed back, but the light had a leader, Luz Theron Telamon, named the Dragon.
Right.
And in Egwene's mind, she's like, wait, what?
The fuck?
Yeah, I thought the dragon was a bad guy because we know that a lot of people...
He broke the world.
He broke the world, so he must be a bad guy. But Tam is saying
no.
He was the leader of the light side. So LTT gathers the 100 companions, plus a small army of about 10,000 people, and they go and storm the Valley of Thakandar, which is like the heart of the Shadow. And hundreds of thousands of bad guys, Trollocs, Fades, Forsaken,
who they say were Aes Sedai.
Right?
Yeah.
We kind of heard like the whole Dreadlords thing are bad Aes Sedai too.
Well, even Egwene goes, wait, Aes Sedai can go bad?
Yeah. What? That doesn't make sense. It's kind of like changing her perspective on things.
Yeah.
But basically, the 100 companions, the army, almost all of them die, if not all of them. The 100 companions are the ones who go... they go mad after and break the world, plus all the other men channelers.
Because they go and they're trying to repair what the creator created.
Yeah, and they, in their pride, broke.
Right. Whatever that means.
Yeah.
We still don't
really know what that means, but we have got an introduction to the prison. We know that there's seals now that we found, so there's this whole big thing about what's actually happening. But the 100 Companions and Lews Therin fought all the way to Shale Ghul, which is the heart of the shadow. And at Shale Ghul, they sealed the Dark One back in his prison, and the Forsaken got trapped and imprisoned there again too. And then the world was saved from the Dark One. But that's kind of like the flip side of things, is that the world was saved from the Dark One, but in turn was destroyed by all the male Aes Sedai who were tainted by the counterstroke of the Dark One.
Right.
So.
Okay.
And that's why the world broke.
Shoot.
End story time with Tam.
Yeah, except that we didn't get to the whole counterstroke thing in his story.
We didn't.
Like,
but that's
you
just
went on a little bit longer
a little
than
bit
Tam
more.
actually. I think that's important to note, because I think a lot of people listening to this probably have never read Ravens, the prologue, and we're recounting it for them. And so in this story with Tam, he says that Lews and all of his buddies, the 100 Companions, went to
Shale Ghul and imprison the Dark One.
Imprison the Dark One and did it.
And save the world from the Dark One. End of story time.
That's when the story ends. It doesn't go on to explain the rest of it. And it's like, oh man, the dragon actually saved the world from the Dark One? That is the opposite of anything they've ever heard before. And it actually stuns all of the children who don't ask basically another question.
Yeah.
Really. About
Except for
this.
Perrin, which has the best question.
Perrin does have a good question.
Yeah.
But they don't ask any more questions about the story or about the, quote, characters in the story. And
well, it's already like a taboo topic, clearly.
yeah, and they actually, from this moment on, don't ever really want to hear stories again.
Yeah.
So way to go, Tam.
Doesn't happen. Yeah. Or maybe they outgrew the stories.
I don't think that's it.
Tam's not allowed to tell stories anymore.
Turns out,
Yeah.
no one asked Tam to tell another story.
Yeah. Well, you have to assume there's a little bit of a repercussion there with like the village council. Maybe some of the women heard like, hey, Tam, stop telling your stories.
It probably something, because when I was reading this, I thought it was weird that Tam is telling this story, and then something like 8 years later, Rand has no reason to think that Tam knows what a Trolloc is.
Mm-hmm.
But he knows this story, like, in detail.
Never talks about it again.
To the point where Rand has forgotten. Like,
Yeah.
even if Rand is 11 or 12, like, I think back to when I was 11 or 12, can I remember every story, like, my parents ever told me? No. Can I remember anything I learned in grade 5 science? No.
Yeah.
Like, no one thinks about any of that. So it makes sense that if Tam never talked about it again, it's basically gone from Rand's memory.
Which really leads into the introductory paragraph about legend fading to myth, right? Myth is long forgotten.
Yeah.
So stories can change and be forgotten really quickly.
Absolutely.
So when we're talking about like 3,000 years from the breaking till present time, it really affects what people know as like certainty, what's actually fact.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Perrin has a great question.
Best question.
What's a dragon?
Yeah, what is that?
If you compare someone to a lion, it means that they're brave like a lion.
Yeah.
But what is a dragon?
Yes, and Egwene thinks Perrin isn't as dumb as he seems.
Yeah. This is the first time she's like, oh, he does listen.
That's a really good question. But it's really cool because now we know that nobody knows, because Tam's response is, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe the Aes Sedai don't even know. But that's the whole cyclical nature of this whole, he's the dragon. No one really knows what a dragon is.
I don't know, but it sounds fierce.
But the coolest part, too, to connect that to the very end of the Eye of the World, is we got a banner of the dragon.
Of an actual serpentine
dragon on the banner.
With legs and, yeah.
Yeah,
So maybe
that's
at
his
one
symbol.
point it was a thing. But Tam says that he doesn't think anyone knows. Maybe not even the Aes Sedai. But I don't know if that's 100% true.
Who knows what the Aes Sedai know. But, you know, one thing I forgot to mention here is I told you earlier today that I had a really fun fact about the village council.
Yeah.
Okay, so way back in chapter 2, and I say way back in chapter 2 because when we did chapter 2...
That was way back in my noob brain of this
series.
Yeah, exactly. Like months and months, half a year ago.
Yeah, it was actually, which is crazy to think about.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So we got introduced to the village council, and the village council in chapter 8 said that there are 8 members of the village council.
Okay.
And on that council, we were able to identify that Sen Bui was on the council,
Yep.
Tam Althor, Bran Alvear, Samuel Craw, Harold Luhan, John Thane, Rowan Hearn, and then there was one person who we never got an identification for.
Okay.
And in this Raven's prologue, we get the identification of the 8th member of the village council.
We do?
We do. And that is Master Cole.
Master Cole.
Yes.
The really, really, really old guy.
Really, really, really old guy.
Who appears to be sleeping, and then turns out he's not sleeping, but then he goes back to pretending to be sleeping.
And also potentially the grandfather of Celia Cole, who was goggling at
Oh,
Perrin.
right. I didn't even mention that name because it was like whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Fun little tidbit there.
I
Now
wonder-
we don't know
I
definitely.
wonder if 8 years later he's just dead. Because
Exactly.
he's literally the oldest man. Older than the wisdom, I think.
And that's the thing. So there's no way to actually know because we don't get
Yeah.
it named in, but this is the only reference that I could ever find for
Ever.
who that 8th member
Like
of
ever in the whole series again? I know you can't say that. Really?
can't really say that, but like up
I
until
have
this
to
point
assume that
it doesn't really come up very
I
often
believe it.
about
So,
who was on the village
like, who
council in
cares?
Emmonsfield way back when.
Yeah. So that's funny.
Yeah.
Okay, so with that, story time is over, and then the mayor announces there are lots of people here from different villages, and it's good to know your neighbors, so none of you are allowed to work together ever again today.
Yeah, go make friends.
Go make friends. And
Yeah.
they're all like, ah.
And you know what? It's not bad advice.
I wonder if Dav and Matt had caught a badger or
Well,
something like
you
that.
think about that, is like so much later,
Yeah.
they're still messing
They're
around
still
together.
messing around.
Still the same boys.
Yeah. People don't change.
People don't change.
And then at this point, Egwene abruptly becomes aware of the ravens. Now there are so many ravens all around, and they're flapping out of the trees and taking off towards the mountains of mist.
Yes. So they're leaving Emmonsfield now. Did they find what they're looking for? Who knows? I guess you'll have to read and find out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But an interesting point is she shifts like somebody's staring at her back, and she turns around and there's a raven staring right at her, and she stares back at them.
Yeah, she said earlier in the chapter 2 that she had to work on her level look.
She's trying to copy Nynaeve's level look.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah.
So, and after a moment, the raven gives a harsh cry and takes off. So she starts to feel silly about letting her imagination get the better of her. They're just birds. Move on. The end. Basically, she's got to be the best water carrier that there's ever been. So she goes off to her job again.
Yeah. And now we get a nice little space between the paragraph, and it's like an exiting paragraph we get now.
Yeah, a little bit of a wrap up to what happens with Egwene for the next
It's
8
like the
years.
fast forward.
It is a little bit of a fast
Yeah.
forward because the next year we get Egwene has to carry water again, and
Yep.
she's disappointed but does her best again. And to her surprise, the following year she does get a promotion,
Yes, to helping with food.
a full year early.
Yep.
So she's excited about that, and then she sets a new goal for herself to be allowed to braid her hair younger than anybody ever.
And we know that most girls get it braided at around 16. But she doesn't think that's actually going to happen. She just is setting the goal
But
for
a
that.
goal that was easy was no goal at all.
Yeah.
I like that,
Well, there you go.
actually. That's a really nice sentiment from Egwene because she's right. If it's not a difficult goal, then you're really not going to have to challenge yourself to meet your goal.
Yeah, except when you make a to-do list about what you have to clean up today, you always put a couple things you've already done.
You've already done, so you already
Yeah.
have things crossed off. But I think that's just because we're a little bit crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. People who make to-do lists are typically a little bit crazy, like in a good way. Like that's me, 100%, so I
Yeah,
can say
yeah.
that. But, you know, the type A personality, clearly that's what Egwene is. And she already has a to-do list for when she's 15, not
Yeah,
16,
yeah.
right? So in the last paragraph, it also mentions that she stopped wanting to hear stories from the grown-ups, though she would like to hear from a gleeman.
Yeah.
Interesting.
How about that? Maybe she'll get that opportunity.
Yeah, and she never stopped dreaming of wanting to see other lands. The boys stopped wanting to hear stories too, which is interesting, which is probably why they actually know nothing about the world,
Yeah.
is they stopped
Yeah.
learning.
Yeah. Or maybe, you know,
they all
village
started
council.
going to work, it sounds like, too.
Well, yeah, they all have work and chores and all this stuff, and maybe the village council and women's circle kind of, you know, shut down some of those more extreme story types.
Yeah. And I'm just going to read the last couple sentences because I think they're fun, and I think a lot of people probably haven't heard them.
Yeah, fair.
So, they all grew older, thinking their world would never change. And many of those stories faded to fond memories, while others were forgotten, or half so. And if they learned that some of those stories really had been more than stories, well, the War of the Shadow, the breaking of the world, Luz Theron Telamon, how could it matter now? And what had really happened back then anyway?
Yeah, so good.
And then the next page is the prologue Dragonmount.
Here you go, with Luz Theron Telamon.
Yeah, so that's cool.
Yeah. Well, it kind of gives you that extra backstory to help you figure out who is this Luz Theron Telamon, what's going on.
Yeah, I do think, especially targeting a little bit younger of a reader, maybe someone who's first being introduced to maybe fantasy or something like that, might make sense to have a little bit more backstory.
Yeah, I think in some ways it does make the prologue a little bit less confusing because you have some context
of a dragon and Luz Theron
of who
and
this
what's
person
going
might
on.
be. So
yeah, because as somebody who, as an adult, read the prologue, as someone who's read fantasy novels before, it was hard to read.
Yeah,
it was confusing. Like, I don't come across as a genius in our first episode. I'm like, what the heck is going on? I have no clue what's happening. I don't even know. So
yeah,
it's kind of funny.
Yeah, it is funny. It's good.
Yeah.
I really do like this prologue to the prologue.
Yeah. And another fun fact, we wanted to name our podcast From the Two Rivers.
And then remembered that it's, in fact, already taken.
Shoot.
Yeah.
But it's okay. It all works out for the best.
We don't want to be sued by Tor this early. So,
yeah, no. Yeah. No. Down the road, when we're more popular.
Yeah. That's, you know, you're doing really good is when Tor comes after you. That's good.
Okay, so I think that will do it for this episode and this season.
And the book.
And the book.
Everything's wrapped up.
Everything is wrapped up in a neat little package. That's a Simpsons reference.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're looking at me like I'm crazy.
I don't know.
Well, I am crazy. But anyway, thanks to everybody for sticking with us. Thanks for listening. And we look forward to seeing you in season 2.
The Great Hunt.
Oh, yeah. Can I start reading it?
Yeah, officially right now, you can start reading.
Okay, cool. Okay, then I might just abandon my reread of The Eye of the World for now, because I really want to start The Great Hunt.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good idea.
Okay, sounds good. And then I think we can actually officially say that this is part of the pattern now.
This book is part of the pattern now.
Thank you for listening to this episode. The Wheel Weaves is hosted by Dani and Brett, edited by Dani, produced by Dani and Brett with Ward Weisensell, Joe Lott, Passion Socks, and Multude. Music by Audionautics.com. If you'd like bonus content, like bonus episodes, outtakes, Q&As, more fun Wheel of Time talk, early access, cool stickers and keychains, and also to support us making great content, visit us at patreon.com/thewheelweavespodcast. Don't forget to check us out on Instagram and Twitter at The Wheel Weaves Podcast. We love interacting with our listeners. Plus, don't forget to rate, subscribe, and tell a friend about us because referrals really are the best compliment. We'd really love for you to come over and join our Discord channel for some spoiler or spoiler-free discussions. You can find the links at our Twitter page as well as on our Patreon page. Thanks again for tuning in because this really is part of the pattern now.